Welcome to the Butterfly Empire podcast.
This the teddy bear he can play. If you don't come play with us, then he will kill you.
Welcome to the Butterfly Empire. Today we are covering the murder of Kitty Genovese, also known as Catherine Kitty Susan Genovese. But it happened in Kew Gardens, Queens, New York City, New York, in the United States. Date March 13th, 1964. She was murdered by stabbing. Oh, dog, that sounded gross. So, let's get this party started in here. She was a 28-year-old bartender who was raped and stabbed outside the apartment building where she lived. 2 weeks after the murder, the New York Times published an article rousingly claiming that the 38 witnesses saw and heard the attack and that none of them called the police or came to her aid. The incident prompted inquiry into what known as the bystander effect, or genovese symptom, and the murder became a staple of U.S. psychology textbooks for the next 4 decades. However, researchers have since uncovered major inaccuracies in the New York Times article. Police interviews revealed the same witnesses had attempted to call the police. So, bystander effect or bystander apathy is a social psychology theory that states that the individual is less likely to offer help to a victim than there are other people present. First proposed in 1964, much research, mostly in the lab, has focused on increasingly varied factors such as number of bystanders, like, why didn't you call the police? Because I thought somebody else would call the police, so I didn't call them. And in fact, everybody feels that way in a certain situation, so they heard what was happening. Nobody called because they always thought that somebody else would do it. La-di-da. Okay. Let's go from here since the introduction is before. Let's jump on in the butterfly.
A woman walks home alone at night only to notice that she's being followed. The attacker runs after her and stabs her several times. Her screams are heard by her neighbors and the attacker flees. Then, despite the alarm seemingly being raised, not only do the police and medical care not arrive, but the attacker returns. Today, we're looking at a sad and shocking case that influenced psychology textbooks decades after the event. The story of Kitty Genovese.
Genovese!
Catherine Kitty Genovese was a bred New Yorker, born in Brooklyn in 1935 and living there until one fateful night in March 1964. The rest of her family moving to Connecticut in 1954 after her mother witnessed the murder. Kitty stayed behind, however, living with her grandparents as she would soon be married. Her marriage wouldn't last long, with it being annulled before the year was out. She then bounced from one clerical job to another before finding work as a bartender. Despite being arrested for taking sporting bets for customers, Kitty was hardworking and soon found herself managing a bar, working double shifts in the hope of saving enough to open her own Italian restaurant. She had also recently moved to an apartment in Kew Gardens, which she shared with her friend Anne Zalonko. Things were looking up, but that would all change at a set of traffic lights in the early hours of March the 13th, 1964. At 2:30 a.m., Kitty pulled the shutters down at the bar and set off home in her red Fiat. On her journey, she stopped at a set of red traffic lights and waited for them to change. Unbeknownst to her, she had caught the eye of a man sat in a parked car at the side of the road. This was 29-year-old Winston Molesley, a machine operator with a wife, 3 children, and no criminal record, though he was more than deserving of one. That night, he had left his home, wife and children with one sole depraved motivation to find a victim. As Kitty sat unaware at that red light, Molesley had made his choice. He tailed her back to her apartment and watched as she parked up some 100 feet from her door. Then, as she made her way down the alleyway towards her home, he made his move, chasing after her, hunting knife in hand. Upon catching up to her, he twice plunged the hunting knife into her back. Kitty screamed, "Oh my God, he stabbed me. Help me." Her screams were heard by several neighbors. One of those, Robert Moser, shouted at Molesley to let that girl alone. With that, Molesley ran off, and the seriously injured Kitty Genovese staggered towards the rear of the apartment building, but a locked door prevented her entry. With the alarm seemingly raised, she may have felt that it was just a matter of time before help would arrive. Sadly, that wasn't to be. He scoured the area, searching for Genovese.
After he
Finding
returned.
her at the rear of the apartment building, he renewed his savage attack. Kitty's hands were cut as she tried to defend herself, but it was to no avail. With his victim subdued due to the beating or blood loss, he then raped her and with one final insult, stole the $49 she had in her purse. He then left her to die.
Her neighbor, close friend, Sophia, found Genovese shortly after the second attack and held her in her arms until the ambulance arrived. Records of the earliest calls of police are unclear and were not given a high priority. The incident occurred 4 years before New York City implemented the 911 emergency call system. One witness said his father called the police after initial attack and reported that the woman was beat up but got up and was staggering around. A few minutes after the final attack, another witness, Carl Ross, called friends for advice on what to do before calling the police. What? Okay. Genovese was picked up by ambulance at 4:15 a.m. and died en route to the hospital. She was buried on March 16, 1964 in Lakeview Cemetery in New Canaan, Connecticut. So, here we go. Police investigation.
64, 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was brutally stabbed to death outside her apartment building in Kew Gardens in the borough of Queens, New York. In a front-page story, the New York Times reported that 37 witnesses either saw or heard the attack. The headline said they saw it, and not one lifted a finger. But now comes a documentary called The Witness, the work of Kitty's younger brother, Bill, who was 16 at the time, and filmmaker James Solomon. And their work, 11 years in the making, reveals that history got this one wrong.
When my mom tried to open the door, it hit Kitty. And she was facing her head towards the door, her feet towards the stairs. And my mother had to push the door in to get in. She held her and she could feel the stab wounds in her back. And her hands kept going, still fighting. And my mom finally calmed her down. But she couldn't talk. She started to gurgle. That was her. She was just passing then. She was dying. So, hours later, I opened the door, and the whole bottom of this foyer was blood.
Joining me now, Bill Genovese and James Solomon. So, Bill, what did history get wrong?
Michael, the most shocking thing that history got wrong was 2 weeks after Kitty's front-page New York Times article, which started out describing the situation this way. 38 people watched over the course of a half an hour and did nothing. 38 people did not watch. The attack took place in two different phases. One was on Austin Street and the other was in the back apartments. It did take place over 32 minutes, something like that. But 38 people watched.
Well, and they didn't stand idly by, because we just showed the clip. Michael Farrar's mother, right, Sophia Farrar, I don't want to give it all away, but you interview her in a very poignant scene in the movie. Your sister died in her arms.
That's right. But of course, it was over the course of 32 minutes, and when Sophia Farrar first found out, it was at the end of her life. It was after the second attack, which was really the fatal attack.
Was this done then to sell newspapers? I have the headline in my hand: 37 who saw murder didn't call the police.
Some have said that. I myself don't believe that. I think that A.M. Rosenthal thought he had an important moral story to tell and got it out that way. The police chief at that time was talking to A.M., who had come back from overseas. He's now the city editor. He wanted to get to know the city a little better, and the police chief said to him, problem the police are having, citizens aren't cooperating. Then later on he said, wait till you hear this one, and he told them the story is he knew it of 38 people watching.
James, in the movie there's a line that Bill delivers when he says, my sister was so much more than her final 30 minutes. And we're showing images of Kitty Genovese as we're speaking. The home movies were priceless and an integral part in telling the story of who she was.
That's Bill and Kitty's Uncle Andy. He was a gadget guy in the 50s, and he let his family use the film camera, and they went out and shot some incredible home movies. You know, in many respects, we think of partly this film as a serial-like or Jinx-like investigative piece, but actually, really, at its core, it's a love story, a sibling love story about a brother reclaiming his sister's life from her very infamous death.
Well, it's not only that, but it's two stories in one. Resilience. The audience should know you gave your legs to this country in service in Vietnam. You are a sleuth who is unstoppable in trying to get the answer to what happened those many years ago. So I'm watching and I'm appreciative of the detective work that you're doing, but I'm also looking at you and I'm saying, my God, how is he able to get this done?
Well, we can blame it on Kitty, and we can also blame it on the fact that I'd never wanted to play for the JV. So it's like you got to be in the game or sit on the sidelines. So my sister instilled in me a desire to find things out. She would answer my questions. That's a big mistake with a kid, because then it's more and more questions. So, and if she couldn't answer it, it's like find it out. Go to the library.
You wanted to meet her killer. He died this past April.
Yeah.
Winston Moseley. He died at age 81. You didn't get to meet him. If you'd met him, what would you have said to him?
I would have said, Winston, I've been writing letters to the parole board for 2 times now, saying that you should not be released and why. I want to hear from you why you think you should be released and what's life been like for you. I'm curious. What's it been like?
Were you prepared to forgive him?
I was prepared to feel what I felt when I talked to him, see what came out of that.
James, amazing that the block looks virtually the same as it did then, and that the two of you together were able to go back to so many primary source individuals and learn so much about a story we all thought we knew.
Well, it's almost like a stand.
So, her murderer, Winston Moseley. 29 years old at the time he murdered Genovese. Was at the Ozark Park, Queens, and worked at Remington Rand as a tab operator, preparing the punching cards used at the time mainly for data input for digital computers. Moseley was married with 2 children and had no criminal record. While in custody, Moseley confessed to killing Kitty. He detailed the attack, corroborating the physical evidence at the scene. He said that his motive for attack was simply to kill a woman, saying he preferred to kill a woman because they were easier and didn't fight back. He stated that he gave up that night around 2 a.m. while his wife was working nights as a registered nurse and drove through Queens to find a victim. Moseley saw Genovese on her way home and followed her to the parking lot before killing her. He also confessed to murdering and sexually assaulting 2 other women, to committing between 30 and 40 burglaries. Subsequently, psychiatric examinations suggested that Moseley was a necrophiliac. You know, he did the dead. Did the duty with the dead. Did the duty with the dead. Cedra.